US, French, and other United Nations troops rushed to aid the South Vietnamese, who were largely outnumbered and outgunned. This battle ended up being extremely costly to both sides, and as the pictures were constantly broadcast back here in the United States, it convinced many Americans, both on the Vietnamese battlefields and sitting in front of their televisions at home, that this war was unwinnable, that we weren't making a difference. Yet thousands of young American lives were being sacrificed in what many believed as a pointless and futile war. Your last empty dash on this slide, US deaths, 1,000 a month. At this stage in the war, US deaths had topped 1,000 a month. And those figures, coupled with the reports and other images that were constantly being fed back to the American people, definitely didn't help win any support for the Vietnam conflict here at home. Speaking of lack of support, demonstrations. Throughout the United States, there was countless demonstrations, either for or against the Vietnam War. And as the war went on, these demonstrations really only stepped up in not only their hatred of the Vietnam War, but increasingly so their hatred of their US presidents and their US government, that they were beginning to see got them involved in this pointless war for no reason. The selective service system, for after the equal sign, draft soldiers. The selective service system is essentially the fancy name for the draft, and it drafted a supply of soldiers. You'll see with the check it out that I share what your draft number would have been had you been born in 1970 or 1971. Now, there was a number of ways, both legal and illegal, to avoid the draft, but the most common legal way to avoid the draft for the empty dash, let's put deferment through college enrollment. If you could prove as a young man that you were enrolled in and attending college, then you could avoid the draft. But back then, they didn't have all the programs for scholarships and loans and grants that they do today. So that went to college were the people that could afford to pay out of pocket 100% for their college education, which, similar to today, not many people could do. So this again is where a lot of people said that the Vietnam War spared the rich and sacrificed the middle and low class young men. As the war went on, as we said, anti-war protests continued to grow, and anti-war sentiment continued to become more and more angry. A couple of nicknames that are very, very common. The cultural movement of young people. These young people, for after the equal sign, are most commonly known as the hippies. We know the hippies. They're known for their tie-dye, their long hair, their lack of basic hygiene, and typically their fondness for drug use and sexual activity. These people spoke out against the war, against what they saw as the man, and against the government. More commonly, we had people fall into two categories, the hawks and the doves. The hawks, for after the equal sign, they were your war supporters. They liked the war. They wanted to know pretty much why we were there, and they felt we were there for a good reason. They thought that we were there to promote democracy, which we were, and to fight communism, which we were. Then we have the doves. The doves, for after the equal sign, they wanted peace. They didn't want us involved in this war. They thought we never really had any business in being there, and they wanted our young men brought home, and brought home safely and soon. Now, of the more famous U.S. demonstrations that went right and went wrong, one of the more famous that went wrong was what happened at Kent State University. On May 4th, 1970, a group of 4 unarmed college students were killed when the inexperienced National Guardmen brought in to restore order on the campus opened fire on them. So for after the Kent State University dash, let's put 4 unarmed students killed. The March on Washington, we talked about this in the Civil Rights Movement, where King actually gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. This March on Washington, many people don't realize, was not only to raise awareness for equality and civil rights, but it was also intended to be an anti-Vietnam protest as well. Now, as things continue to heat up, both at home and internationally, we have what happened at Cambodia. President Johnson has since refused to run for re-election. He is no longer president of the United States.